Thor, since its inception, has always been a character rooted in godlike arrogance. He has always been the biggest, baddest, meanest person on the planet. He has always been immortal, all powerful, and the son of Odin, one of the most powerful gods in the entire pantheon of the Marvel Universe. So, of course, Thor would view himself as far above mortals. And I think the one thing this show does great, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, is that Thor is above all of these people. He believes he is above all of the mortals. But at the same time, they do a really good job of deconstructing this and showing us that Thor really isn't all too different from all of us. And to do this, the show starts us at Thor's highest point, much like the first Thor movie that the MCU dropped. We are shown that Thor believes himself to be far superior than the human race, than mortals, and he seeks to use that superiority to protect us. Thor believes that there are threats coming to Earth, i.e. metahumans, mutants, and things of that nature, that he simply doesn't believe humans can control and or take on their own with their meager police forces and emergency services. And so Thor takes it upon himself to protect the world. You see, at the start of EMH, there is no Avengers. We don't know if the X-Men are in this universe, at least not in this real first season. We aren't shown that. And so there is no superhero team. There are no big superheroes out around the time at the start of this show. So Thor really takes it upon himself to protect Midgard and protect the people of Earth, even if he does so in a fairly condescending manner. At least until he meets Jane Foster, who starts to open his eyes to the idea that even though humans are physically fragile, it's their spirit that gets them to be able to do all of these amazing things. And I think that surprises Thor.
Thank you.
You have no powers, no armor, no weapons, and yet I saw you risk your life to help the wounded. Why?
Because they needed my help, so I helped them.
But while Thor is off playing hero with the mortals and trying to understand him, he is neglecting his homeworld, which is Asgard, the place that he is supposed to protect. Thor is supposed to be the protector of Asgard, especially with Odin nearing his once yearly slumber, in which he leaves Asgard completely undefended because he must sleep to preserve his powers. And of course, typically as Odin nears his sleep or gets to going to sleep, the enemies of Asgard tend to attack in full force. And while Thor is off in the mortal realm being a hero, trying to understand them and get why they do the things they do, and wants to take them under his wing almost, he is being called home constantly to deal with conflicts that he has. But for Thor, not only does he find that the enemies he has to face this time around are the frost giants, someone he is far more used to having to fight as they are predominantly enemies for Thor and the Asgardians, he also has to fight his own brother. Thor's brother Loki has been in constant sort of conflict between Thor and Odin, but in a more subtle and subdued way, to which they are more arguing as siblings and family rather than full-blown attacks. This is the first time that Loki actually attempts a coup of Asgard. He believes that he can rule the place better and rule it better than Odin. Now, Loki, in my opinion, does bring up a couple of points against Odin that make a lot of sense. Odin as a father is very controlling. He believes that everything should be done his way and that everything he does is correct. He will willingly spy on you, he will figure out what you are doing, and if he disapproves of it, he'll make sure that is very known, even if the thing you're doing is good, as in Thor's case. But do not get me wrong, Loki is not a good substitute for Odin, because despite all of Odin's flaws, Loki is by far going to be worse, and so he receives a punishment. But unfortunately for Thor, Odin basically wants him to stop going to Midgard and stop going to Earth, because he's about to enter his Odin sleep, and Odin needs Thor home to protect Asgard, to take care of his #1 duty, and sees Midgard as a secondary thing.
You need to be here. Asgard is your responsibility, not Midgard.
The mortals need me, Father. I return to Midgard again and again because their world is spawning dangers that mankind has never seen before.
Thor gives a very impassioned speech about why he believes he needs to go to Midgard to protect them. He essentially thinks them too weak to protect themselves and believes that he needs to play hero in his own right. Now, part of this, in my opinion, I believe this is Thor's god complex. Obviously, he is a god, but he believes that he could do such a better job protecting them that he has to be there to do it, whether they want him there or not, and he's much willing to disparage his duties in Asgard to do so. Even when his friends come to visit him, Thor justifies his staying in Midgard because he believes he can make a genuine difference here. He doesn't feel like he makes a difference in Asgard because the war there is eternal. There is no stopping. The fighting goes forever. But here in Midgard, he believes that he can stop it all by himself, even if that's not true.
Here, I can make a difference. In Asgard, the endless cycle of fighting, it is meaningless. On Earth, everything matters. I am needed here, Balder.
Now, what Thor fails to share with everybody is that part of the reason he stays in Midgard is because he is in love with Jane Foster. He sees her brave nobility, he sees the fact that she is willing to put her life at risk despite not being immortal, despite not having godlike powers, and he decides to choose to latch himself onto her. He finds the beauty not only in her physical appearance, but the way in which she acts and the sacrifices she is willing to make. And so when Thor is on Earth and he's not saving the day, he spends a lot of time with her, trying to understand the best of humanity, as that's what he believes she is, especially when most other mortals he's met have been bad guys. But Thor's kind of date, kind of not date ends up being interrupted, as there is once again a threat that most mere mortals couldn't handle, at least in Thor's mind, and that would be Graviton. He is attacking the city as a result of multiple breakouts from all of the prisons around the world, the maximum security prisons like the Vault, like the Cube, and things of that nature. They have all been broken out, and Thor now has to deal with these problems and these villains, especially Graviton, who poses an extreme threat not only to him, but to the world. It's kind of funny, despite Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne already being there, Thor is really the first person who rushes into the fray against Graviton. He wants to protect the Earth so badly that he is willing to throw himself at just about any problem, because he does believe he is so much superior to that problem. He believes he can handle it without issue and by himself, and so he stands alone when he does do these attacks. It's part of his god complex. And yet, Thor is practically ineffective against Graviton, at least by himself. And what I find very interesting is that Thor was extremely receptive to getting teamwork and to getting help from other heroes around New York that he simply just didn't know of at the time. And I find that very interesting about his character, is that he was so willing to accept this help, and I think Thor himself was just so relieved to have other people that wanted to do good in the world, especially in the science-based aspects, as a majority of the foes Thor has fought have all been because of science. Over the 3 episodes Thor has been in this show, just about every foe he's fought has been science-based. So I think it was important for him as a character to see that science doesn't just bring pure destruction and can be used for good. Thor is willing to put aside his god complex a lot, actually, if it meant helping others. See, when I say Thor has a god complex, I'm not saying in the way in which he thinks he's so far above everybody else that they're peons and that he should rule them. He thinks he is so far above everyone else that he wants to protect them. At the end of the day, he's doing all of this out of the goodness of his heart. He is coming from the right place, even if he's going about it in sometimes the wrong manner. But regardless of that, Thor is excited to have new friends that want to save the world with him, even if he's not the biggest fan of everybody he's working with. Thor and Hulk are at very different ends of the spectrums from each other. While the two of them are definitely both headstrong, Thor himself is typically more calm and cheery and more team-oriented, where Hulk is far more of a loner. Hulk does not want to basically be a part of a team, even though he kind of does, and he also doesn't, right? So Hulk is finding himself almost on the outs with the Avengers, even when he is a part of the team officially for the first time. And Thor doesn't really like Hulk's attitude very much, especially when it comes to their brand new base. Thor finds Hulk's attitude very insulting and does not like the way in which he speaks to the rest of his comrades, and doesn't really take the time to even ask why Hulk may be feeling the way he does at all. The two of them essentially lack basic communication skills. But considering who Thor's father is, I'm really not surprised Thor lacks common communication habits that other people may have. Now, the Avengers do sort of try to quell the rages between Hulk and Thor, as the two of them are often butting heads in this episode, but that doesn't really prevail very well because there's somebody else pulling the strings behind the scene. But another thing that I find interesting is when Thor does realize that maybe him and the Hulk were in the wrong and they're on two opposite ends of the spectrum, he does try to extend that olive branch out to Hulk. He says, hey, let's go patrol. The computer system says there is an intruder inside the house. I think we should work together on this. And I think that's a really great moment for Thor.
If you wish to test your mettle against an Asgardian, I am happy to oblige.
But unfortunately, Hulk responded to Thor with aggression, and so Thor responded with aggression back. But Hulk does try to walk away from the whole situation and simply asks to be left alone. But Thor can't leave Hulk alone, as Pepper Potts does try to warn him that Hulk being left in this state is liable to destroy the city, which is kind of interesting that they continue to preface that, oh, Hulk isn't a bad monster who could destroy everything, and yet they continue to treat him like he is. More on that in my actual Hulk video. Regardless, Thor doesn't really go about trying to handle this situation well, and ends up provoking Hulk into a full-blown attack, as the two of them end up fighting each other for real this time. And Thor almost seems to be happy about this, like he is finally ready to get his ones in with Hulk. And by ones, I mean the entire Avengers is going to jump him, because the two of them are causing havoc in Manhattan. Now, I spent such a large chunk of this portion talking about the conflict between Thor and Hulk because it's important. Amora the Enchantress has been essentially looking for a way to split the Avengers up before they are even formed, simply to keep her own agendas working smoothly. And to do so, she saw the little crack between Thor and Hulk and decided to shove a giant-sized wedge inside of it and try to split that log completely in half. And she very well admits this to Thor. Now, of course, Thor is starting to realize that a lot of the problems that he was having with Hulk happened to be manufactured. While I do believe there was still issues the two of them had with each other, and that is being very real, Thor does realize that he was definitely in the wrong as much as Hulk was, because the two of them were being egged on and manipulated by Amora the Enchantress, which is pretty terrible. But I think this was a good learning experience for Thor. It starts to show him that even though he is this godlike being, he's not really above human emotions, or mortal emotions, sorry, just like the rest of them are. He's not as far above that, and so he does try once again for the third time to extend that olive branch and apologize.
You have won the day, friend Hulk. Truly, thou art a warrior to be reckoned with, for few can resist the Enchantress's charms.
Nothing's changed. You all thought I was a savage monster. You were gonna take me down. You're no different than Ross and S.H.I.E.L.D.
But the damage was already done, and Hulk was ready to no longer be with the team, and that's understandable. And Thor understands this as well, but it is good to keep in mind for future, as it will become important later. But as for right now, Thor has other problems to deal with, and that is his hatred of science. Now, this isn't really an arc for Thor, but more of a pre-setup for an arc for Thor, if you get what I'm saying. Essentially, for a majority of this show, we have known that Thor does not like technology, specifically mortal technology. He doesn't like the tech, he does not like the science, he likes none of it because he sees it as only problematic. He sees that a majority of the issues that mortals are facing nowadays is a result of science. For every Stark Industries, Thor sees a Hydra, a AIM Robotics. He sees all of these bad companies. He even sees people like S.H.I.E.L.D. who operate definitely in that gray area. So Thor doesn't view technology as this great, wonderful thing. He sees it as something terrible and something that often gets mortals into trouble, as technology did spawn majority of the villains we see. It's the science that gets them. For example, there is an entire 2-part special in this show called Gamma World, which is the result of science going rogue. Not necessarily from the good guys, more so from the leader who is orchestrating trying to turn everybody into gamma irradiated monsters to fuel his better world. But in the process of doing so, not only does the leader decide to unleash an entire torrent of gamma irradiated villains for the Avengers to fight, he ends up turning not only the Avengers, but a large proponent of Las Vegas into gamma irradiated monsters. Thor is the only Avenger who is immune to this, well, besides Hulk, but he's not there at the time. Thor is immune simply because he is Asgardian, but he has to watch as every single one of his friends and a large proponent of the entire city of Las Vegas is turned into these grotesque monsters, all at the hands of science. Something that he keeps being told is good for him, that science is a good thing, but Thor only seems to see the negative side effects of science. He does not see the benefits of it almost at all. Part of this does reinforce his notion that he can take on the entire world by himself, that he should be on Earth protecting them because they can't protect himself. Part of this does play into that, but not to the largest extent. Now, Thor is really trying to help save the planet when it comes to this worldwide event, once again saving them from science, but he can't do it alone, and that's where Hulk and Hawkeye come in. And this is where that olive branch from earlier becomes more important. Thor is going to be the first Avenger to truly apologize to Hulk and to try and mend that relationship. To try and say to Hulk, I apologize for the way I was acting. I understand that you are a valuable component to this. And I think it's one of the few things Thor sees that science benefited the world by giving us somebody like Hulk.
Will you walk away as well? You are indeed a noble warrior, Hulk. One who has saved the Avengers and now helped save the world. I would trust you with my life. Will you trust us?
And while Thor does get Hulk to eventually not only come and stay, but also recruit Hawkeye, there are some things that are lurking in the background that may be far worse than just the pure science that Thor seems to be seeing as the only problem mortals are having. Thor will soon have to reconcile with the fact that tech isn't the only thing that's threatening mortals, but I think it's first important that put a little bit more focus on Jane Foster and Thor's relationship, as the two of them are integral to each other. At least Jane Foster is really integral to Thor's growth as a character throughout this show, as she is constantly seen not only there for him, but as his sort of voice of reason, especially when Thor is down on himself, down on technology, or down on humanity itself. She is always there to sort of bolster how Thor is feeling about all of this and be his rock, and I think that is very important for his character and shouldn't go unmentioned. But when Thor does come back from his little walk and talk with Jane Foster after being summoned to the Avengers Mansion, he finds that not only is it being overrun with their former villains that they fought over the last couple episodes, but that Thor is on their chopping block, and that part of the villains he has to fight include Amora the Enchantress, who he has already fought, and Scourge once again. These two Asgardians have brought together the abominations of technology and science Thor describes, all to fight him and destroy the Avengers. Now, this does leave Thor fairly confused as he's trying to figure out why a goddess like Amora would be working with the Masters of Evil, or why she would be aligning herself with them, as he does come to find out that she formed the team of these villains. She is the mastermind behind the Masterminds of Evil, even as Baron Zemo presents himself as the leader. But the more important reason I wanted to cover this episode specifically is because it does show that Thor's problems and the mortals' problems don't all just stem from science and tech. They do somewhat have roots in mysticism, much like Thor. Part of the problems come from the gods and goddesses, and actually part of the problem is Thor. Thor being on Earth is attracting not only Amora the Enchantress, but her bodyguard Scourge to attack the Earth, the Avengers, and the people that live there. He is part of the problem, even if he doesn't recognize that. But of course, like always in these shows, the Avengers do come together as a group and they prevail over the Masters of Evil, with Hawkeye and Black Panther both leading a coup along with Ant-Man in order to take out the Masters of Evil and help the other Avengers escape from their prisons. Now, this isn't really the most important to the analysis of the character, but it is one of my favorite Thor moments upcoming because it's just hilarious. He ends up saying that he won't fight one of his own and he won't fight an Asgardian, so instead he just gets Hulk to do it for him.
Thor, you would not harm me, would you?
Nay. But my friend might.
But while the Avengers may have won the day, there always seems to be something lurking on the horizon for them, especially when it comes to Amora the Enchantress. It almost seems like science may be the secondary antagonist in this show, where mysticism really does take point and center, especially when it comes to Thor's side of mysticism. But that's just my speculation, and totally isn't rooted in any sort of facts in this show at all. But besides that, I think it's time we move on to the next huge arc, which is Thor's reconciliation with science and mysticism. You see, the Casket of Ancient Winters is something that is only mere legend to Asgardians, a casket that could wreak untold destruction upon the world in the way of eternal winter. But before that, Thor and Iron Man are having their typical spats, especially when it comes to the way in which they want to deal with villains, specifically Radioactive Man. Iron Man and Thor have two very different ways in which they think they should solve this. Thor thinks he should use water, as he believes it is not only safer for the city, but safer for the people he protects, where Iron Man wants to use the technology of his arc reactor, even though it could risk blowing up the entire city by overcharging Radioactive Man. And while they are initially going to go through with Iron Man's plan, Thor decides to upend it entirely and goes for the water plan instead because he believes it to be the safer option. And the two characters, of course, butt heads over this because Thor is still as hard-headed as ever and believes what he is doing is correct, and Iron Man's the exact same way when it comes to technology and not believing in mysticism like Thor does. Whereas Thor does believe that technology does work, he just doesn't believe that it works for the betterment of humanity, and he would rather see mysticism prevail. And of course, after Thor pulls his stunt without any sort of recommendation from anybody else, the two of them get in an argument.
And you would have poisoned Midgard itself by sending Radioactive Man into the ground. What are you— Your love of science makes you forget the very realm you are trying to protect.
You pay more heed to your machines than your heart, Tony Stark.
Thor once again criticizes Tony for believing that technology is the correct way, and that he essentially does too much thinking with his mind, not enough thinking with his heart. But this is quickly interrupted by the fact that there is an everlasting winter sweeping across what is supposed to be a sunny summer New York. The only Avengers available to really deal with this threat is the core group of T'Challa, Thor, and Iron Man. Iron Man being on the very far technology side, Thor being on the very far mystical side, and T'Challa being the level-headed balance that is needed between the two of them. He believes in blending both mysticism and science into one art form. And now, Thor and Iron Man both argue about the source of this never-ending winter, with Tony not even believing the fact that Thor is Asgardian, nor that this is a part of being from an Asgardian or mystical technology, whereas Thor is basically saying, hey, that's not cool, and Iron Man then goes on to try and attack Thor and say that, hey, a lot of our issues are coming from your mysticism, not just my technology, and Thor argues back with him, at least until Black Panther does figure out where the source of this storm is coming from by blending both mysticism and technology into one art form. Now, when Thor, Iron Man, and Black Panther do arrive to where Malakath is holding the never-ending winter, they have to confront him and find a way to defeat what is an almost all-powerful dark elf that Thor simply could not beat on his own. But at the end of the day, what it ended up taking in order to defeat Malakath, as he is a dark elf, it took Iron Man's technology, his weakness to iron, combined with Thor's use of the mystical arts in order to defeat him, as Iron Man's suit didn't contain enough iron to simply defeat Malakath himself, and Thor didn't have enough raw power to defeat him either. The two of them had to work together, put their differences aside, and much like T'Challa, blend science with mysticism. And I think this finally comes full circle with Thor's whole hatred of science, as he sort of finally has a respect enough for it that he understands that it can be a good thing and not just a bad thing itself. And I think that is very important to his character arc throughout the show. It's his second biggest character arc throughout the show. Oh, and Iron Man and Thor make up, which is also fairly important.
Malekith without you.
Hey, no problem. My tech, it was nothing against him. I needed.
Together, we...
But unfortunately, not everything would end well, as Amora the Enchantress and Scourge would arrive in order to steal the Casket of Ancient Winters, and Thor's first reaction, of course, is to try and go to Asgard to stop them. But when he does finally open that portal, all of these months of avoiding Asgard, of pushing it to the side and instead focusing solely on Midgard, that argument with his father, has come back to bite him, as he is locked out of his own homeworld. And to Thor, that is nothing short of devastating. But before we can address that, there is one more pressing matter that needs to be talked about, and that is Thor's self-sacrifice and his temptation. So Iron Man and Thor are working together to try and figure out a way for Thor to go back to his homeworld. Again, really building off the fact that Thor and Iron Man have found a way to work through their technology and their mysticism and put it together, and I think that is a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, technology would come back to be the greater villain of this next mini arc. Because well in the middle of trying to figure out how to get Thor back to his homeland, the entire mansion is going haywire. And yet, of course, the mansion is unresponsive to anything Iron Man tries, and it gets so bad, as a matter of fact, Iron Man loses complete control of his suit and starts attacking Thor. Now, Thor is obviously very confused by this, as the two of them were just having a nice conversation with one another, and Iron Man is trying to explain to Thor what's going on and that he can't control his suit at all. Now, of course, Thor and Iron Man are both able to work through his suit's malfunction by Thor completely overcharging Iron Man's suit with electricity, as the two of them are trying to figure out what exactly is causing all of the things, not only in the mansion to go wrong, but with Iron Man to go wrong. And the two of them end up narrowing it down to Ultron, a robot that was made by both Tony Stark and Hank Pym and recently combat activated to be used against Kang the Conqueror. Now, unfortunately, this did lead to Ultron believing that the entire world would be better off if all heroes and all of humanity were destroyed, as it's the only way to protect them. Of course, Thor isn't going to stand for this, so he immediately brushes Ultron. And unfortunately, Thor is seemingly killed. He is incinerated by Ultron in front of the Avengers. Except Thor's not really dead. As a matter of fact, Amora the Enchantress saved his life. She teleported him to a world full of bliss for him to live in with her forever, free of conflict, free of war, free of pain, and free of everything that could possibly hurt Thor, as the two of them could live together in harmony forever.
I can't believe he's gone. That Thor is gone. Should we move his hammer? Hulk, maybe...
Can't move it. Can't even pick it up.
Why not?
Because I'm not Thor.
And will the Avengers have to try and come to terms with the fact that one of their founding and key members is potentially dead, at least in their eyes? Thor himself has found himself in a weird conundrum. He is in a place where not only is he happy and safe, well, happy relatively speaking, as Amora the Enchantress is keeping him happy there, but he is safe and being cared for and loved. Why can't it be me? Anyways, Thor is essentially being taken advantage of by Amora the Enchantress, as this is the life that she wants for him, not necessarily the life that Thor wants for himself. Thor, at his heart and in his core, is a protector. He wants to help people, and he wants to help the people of Midgard specifically. Giving up on not only Asgard, but Midgard as well, does not sit with Thor at all. And unfortunately, he gains the scorn of Amora the Enchantress, and pretty much forever severs whatever connection the two characters had, as Thor basically says he does not want her love whatsoever, and Amora does not take too kindly to this. But instead of forcing Thor to stay with her, she decides to send him out there, but basically wishes death upon him. And with that, Thor is returned to the mortal realm just in time to help save his friends and the entire world from Ultron. Thor does prove to be one of the most virtuous Avengers in this scenario, as he was able to fend off the temptation from Amora the Enchantress, something I totally would not have been able to do, but that's besides the point, as Thor is sort of ready to continue to be this grand hero. But even as the day is won by the Avengers and they are able to defeat Ultron, really thanks to the help of Hank Pym and Tony Stark, as Thor is getting beaten up pretty badly in this fight, just like most fights in this show, Thor really just sucks in this show. They made him fairly weak, and that kind of sucks, but that is beyond the point. He is kind of too OP for an Avengers show anyways, but whatever. Regardless, the day is saved, but unfortunately for the Avengers, there's always seemingly something looming on the horizon, ready to make everything, not say 10 times worse, but far worse, as Thor has a premonition for what is to come next, and it is far from good.
The Enchantress's fury was great, but she told me that sending me back to Midgard was a fate worse than death. I fear that as dangerous as Ultron was, something worse is coming.
And for now, it's finally time for Thor to find his way home, and that kicks off the very last arc of this first season. Iron Man has devised a way to get Thor home using the Norn stones to bend a fold in reality in order to transport Thor back to his home planet of Asgard without him being blocked out of it. And so the Avengers scour the world for the Norn stones in order to activate all of them to get Thor home. But unfortunately for Thor, they were already being scouted by Amora the Enchantress and Scourge, as they are needed for Amora's plot to take over the world, or at least what appears to be Amora the Enchantress's plot to take over the world. And this is going to end up being one of the last few fights in which we see Amora the Enchantress as a direct line to Thor. And while Amora the Enchantress was trying to enact her plot in order to help take over the world, Thor unfortunately has to bear witness to Baron Zemo's plot for ultimate power, as Baron Zemo attempts to completely take over and control Amora the Enchantress, all for his own gain in order to take over the world, because that is the only thing Baron Zemo seems to care about in totality. And this would really spark the downfall of not only Baron Zemo, but it would also start the downfall of Amora the Enchantress's boss, Loki. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, as first Thor has to figure out a way to escape, and when he does, he ends up telling all of the Avengers to destroy the Norn Stones, and this ends up scattering them across the 9 realms, which lands Thor in Asgard. Thor made it home only to find that his brother Loki has not only taken the throne of Asgard, but taken the complete place of Odin, his own father. Now, Thor is, of course, not only bewildered by all of this, but is trying to wrap his mind around how any of this has happened in the time in which he has been gone, as it has only been a few months. But Loki is more than willing to explain this.
And all the 9 realms will bow down to me. Asgard, Vanaheim, Svartalheim, Alfheim, Nidavellir. I have conquered them all. Jotunheim and Niflheim are mine to command. Only Midgard remains. And there's no—
While Thor and the Avengers might have wrecked Loki's plan to take control of Midgard, he's going to get it regardless, as that's how he feels. You see, almost everything in this entire show has been orchestrated by Loki. Whether it was from the Frost Giants' invasion of Asgard in order to give Thor a reason to throw Loki in a prison where he wouldn't be looked upon, along with using Amora the Enchantress to spy on not only Thor but the Avengers the entire course of the show, using her as an inside man essentially, but also in sparking the seeds that would further split both Thor and Odin from one another, basically keeping Thor far enough away from Asgard for long enough, because him and his father were having a spat about Thor spending too much time in Midgard anyways, that Loki could worm his way into taking over Asgard while Thor was busy. And to ensure that Thor was busy throughout the entire course of these last few months, Loki caused a mass breakout that happened to alleviate almost 88 villains, causing Thor to spend a majority of his time distracted and permanently away from Asgard, and used Amora the Enchantress to sow even more chaos for the Avengers when they eventually formed, in order to keep them off the trail of Loki. Everything was planned and orchestrated by Loki. To certain degrees, of course. I mean, Loki couldn't plan for Kang the Conqueror, nor could he plan for Ultron, but all of this did end up helping him in his cause regardless, so it wouldn't surprise me if he would try to take credit for it. But I think the starkest difference by this end point of the season, in which we see Thor from the Thor that we saw at the very beginning of the show, is that Thor puts complete and utter faith in the fact that the Avengers will not only save him, but stop Loki. Thor believes the mortals are so powerful by this point, and he believes in them so much that they could rival Loki, who is juiced up by the Odin Force, mind you. Thor went from thinking that the mortals were helpless and could do nothing to stop him, into believing that they were his only hope to saving all 9 realms and awaking Odin in order to keep everything running smoothly. And I think that is a really big progression, in my opinion, of Thor's character, and it sort of is culminating in his final arc to completion. Thor is finally ready to accept that the mortals are on just about the same level that he is, and that despite the fact that they are not gods, despite the fact that they are not immortal, it is their spirit and their will to do what they believe is right that will give them the strength in order to defeat Loki. All of this spearheaded by Captain America, of course, as the Avengers do show up and are ready to fight for Thor and to try and save him, even if they aren't really going to succeed as of right now. And as Thor is freed and spurred on by his friends, by the Avengers, he gets ready to try and help fight Loki and hopefully wake his father, who would truly be able to defeat the god of trickery. But Thor has one last test, and that is to receive his hammer back, having to push through all of his limits in order to be able to retrieve it, just so he can distract Loki long enough. And Thor manages to do this. I believe partly is because he is spurred on by the need to save not only all of the people of Midgard, but to help fight along his friends, of which he views as full equals by this point. And Thor and the Avengers do succeed in saving the day as they get Odin to not only wake up, but return the Odin Force back where it belongs and get Loki captured. And Thor decides to give a really great speech by the end of this, recognizing the mortals for really saving Asgard and not himself.
You have freed us.
No, Father, I have not. I myself was freed by the Avengers.
Mere mortals?
These mortals just saved all the 9 realms. They deserve our respect. Avengers, I thank thee. Truly, I am honored to count myself among you.
And that allows Thor's character to come full circle from the beginning of the series to the end of the series. And I think it is really beautiful. I think it really just is a better version of Thor's first movie from the MCU. They capture Thor's not only arrogance but humility in an extremely well done way, and we start to slowly show throughout the course of the show how Thor not only comes to respect science and technology, but comes to respect mortals in such a way that he believes them to be equals and sometimes even above the gods that he works with. Alright, so that was the whole video, all of the analysis stuff. We're finally at the end, which is more of my thoughts on this Thor. I really enjoy him. It's my favorite version of Thor, hands down, like regardless of everything. As for these videos, I just want to say thank you all for watching once again. I swear, these videos get longer and longer every single time I make them. I just keep finding more and more to say, and as I keep rewatching these episodes, I realize there are some key moments that I missed for certain other characters that I need to work into the big retrospective when I put all these videos together. And again, there is a Black Panther video and there will be a Wasp video, but Wasp will be last, saving the best for last. Totally not because I didn't plan to give her her own video, but now I am going to because of all of your requests. Totally not because of that. Anyways, I just wanted to say if you like the video, please leave me a like. It goes a very long way. If you're feeling so inclined, you can sub to my channel as well, as it does also go a long way. But if you dislike the video, please leave me a dislike and then let me know why in the comments you didn't like the video or what was wrong with it that made you dislike, as I think the feedback is important. And if you are feeling so inclined and you are in a financial position that you can support me, I do have a Patreon in which you will get these videos unedited, you will get them all early, and as well you'll get my undying thanks. And now it's about time that I thank the patrons that I do have in the $5 tier and above. These guys are the best, so shout out Golden Boy 420, shout out Dakota Rawson, shout out MC Bomb 27 and Donovan Gomez. Thank you all so much, and I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic day.